it's also important to look at what hasn't happened, which is we haven't seen a major defense deal being announced, and there were expectations of that taking place in the run-up to the visit. So I think that to some degree shows the limits on the India-Russia relationship.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is in India and has announced an agreement with Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, to continue the uninterrupted trade of oil from Russia to India. This comes despite pressure from US President Donald Trump to stop buying oil from Moscow. Here's President Modi speaking at a press conference with Putin in New Delhi today.
Humanity has had to endure countless challenges and crises. And during all of these, the India-Russia friendship has stood firm like a pole star. These relations are rooted in mutual respect and deep trust and have always stood the test of time.
Ahead of the talks, Modi stated his desire for an end to the conflict in Ukraine, telling Putin that the world should return to peace. So let's get all the latest from Dr. Chietigj Bajpaee, Senior Research Fellow for South Asia in the Asia-Pacific programme at Chatham House. What do you make of the friendly tone between the two leaders, Dr. Bajpaee?
Well, I think it clearly reflects an attempt to reaffirm the India-US relationship. In one way, President Putin's visit can be considered as routine. Both leaders from both countries, they meet quite regularly. I think Putin and Modi have met about 20 times since Modi became prime minister in 2014. But if we place that in a broader geopolitical context, it's clearly a significant visit. This is, of course, Putin's first visit in 4 years, notably his first since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. For India, I think it's an attempt to show the world, and the West in particular, that it maintains a diversified and independent foreign policy, that it's not beholden to the whims of the Trump administration. And for Russia, I think it's an attempt to show that it's not isolated despite Western sanctions.
How much will an oil trade agreement anger Donald Trump?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of focus on the energy side. Modi is, of course, referred to energy security as being a strong and important pillar of the relationship between both countries. And this refers not only to India's purchase of crude oil, but also other areas like nuclear power. Russia is participating in the largest civil nuclear power project in India. Yeah, there's been much said about Putin providing quote unquote uninterrupted shipments of fuel to India. But I think that is going to be much easier said than done, given the secondary sanctions and tariffs that the Trump administration has imposed on India. India may be able to square that circle by purchasing crude oil from non-sanctioned entities. So Rosneft and Lukoil are the two Russian companies that have been sanctioned, and they account for about half of Russia's oil exports. India can purchase from these other entities. More broadly, I think in New Delhi will be obviously holding out hope that a peace deal will eventually be reached in Ukraine, which would lead to a de-escalation of tensions between Moscow and Washington, which would then prompt the U.S. to drop the 25% tariffs that it's imposed on India for its purchase of Russian oil.
Well, that would be what they'd hope. But is there a chance that they could see further tariffs?
I think that is, of course, always a possibility. I mean, it's interesting to note the optics of this, with Putin visiting India the same month as India is set a deadline to conclude a trade deal with the European Union. So we could see a EU-India free trade deal the same month as Putin visiting India, and possibly even a US-India trade deal. So I think this is all alludes to India's longstanding commitment to strategic autonomy in its foreign policy, which essentially means engaging all major poles of influence in the international system. But strategic autonomy only really works when all the poles actually get along with each other. So as relations deteriorated between Washington and Moscow, the India-Russia relationship came under growing scrutiny. So I think that is a key challenge facing India's foreign policy approach.
And what about other deals? I mean, are we seeing closer ties between the two on defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said, there's been a lot of emphasis on this the energy angle, but I would argue actually that the real sort of emphasis of Putin's visit is to develop a more diversified and balanced economic relationship. There's been a significant increase in bilateral trade between India and Russia in recent years, up from less than $10 billion before the COVID pandemic to almost $70 billion this year. And they've set a target of $100 billion by 2030. But much of that has been driven by the sharp increase in India's import of Russian crude oil. So I think there is a real push to try and diversify that relationship. They've announced a long-term economic cooperation program looking out to 2030, aimed at deepening bilateral trade, investment, and strategic cooperation. They're looking at deepening people-to-people contacts. India has announced that it's opened two consulates in Russia. The Russia RT News Network is establishing a bureau in India. There's new visa schemes and a labor mobility agreement. So all of that is aimed at trying to strengthen or facilitate people-to-people contact. But the point that you raise, I think, is really interesting. It's also important to look at what hasn't happened, which is we haven't seen a major defense deal being announced, and there were expectations of that taking place in the run-up to the visit. So I think that to some degree shows the limits on the India-Russia relationship.
Modi called for peace in Ukraine. Has he got any particular vision for this peace or any idea how that is, or is it just talk?
Modi's comments today is that he said that India has stood for peace since the beginning, that it welcomes a peaceful and lasting solution to the war, and it's ready to contribute in the future. So I think India's official position is one of pragmatic neutrality. So it's neither condemned nor condoned Russia's actions in Ukraine, and its position is that its close relationship with Moscow doesn't equate to an endorsement of Russia's actions in Ukraine. As you say, I think there's been maybe more symbolism than substance to a lot of its position. Putting aside the statements that Modi has made that now is not the era of war and that it stands on the side of peace, much of its actions have been largely driven by self-interest. And I would say you've seen other countries play a far more visible role in trying to de-escalate the conflict. So whether we talk about Turkey or the United States or even China to some degree. So I think any pressure that India has applied on Moscow will be largely behind closed doors to avoid embarrassing Putin.
On a sort of personal basis, do we know whether Putin and Modi get on? What's the dynamic between them? Do we have any idea?
Yeah, they do maintain a close personal relationship. We could see that with the optics. Modi welcoming Putin at the airport, giving him a hug. They shared the same car together from the airport. There was a private dinner last night at Modi's residence. He's referred to the relationship between both countries as the pole star in a changing world order. So I think there is a close personal relationship. As I mentioned, they've met at least 20 times since Modi became prime minister in 2014. But that being said, again, if we take a step back and look at it at a broader strategic level, India, I think, is trying to put across a more benign worldview, which is non-Western, but not explicitly anti-Western. And I think that puts India increasingly out of sync with the position of countries like Russia, but also China and Iran. So I would argue, yes, there is a close personal relationship, that India does not want to sever that relationship, particularly under duress or under pressure from the West. But I think the long-term direction of travel is towards what I would call a managed decline in the bilateral relationship.
Dr. Chietigj Bajpaee, Senior Research Fellow for South Asia and the Asia Pacific Programme at Chatham House. Thank you very much for joining me. We've got some texts coming in here. Obviously, one actually very angry resident of Kingham who's wondering who was filling up their car park. Yes, it is me, I'm afraid. A gentleman called Gordon who sent several messages, not a fan of Ukraine and wondering why anybody is trying to give Ukraine any money at all. We have Peter. Is it possible that Trump's bizarre behaviour, often seeming to favour Russia, is being driven by some hold that Putin has over him? I think this is dredging up the old compromat question, of which I have no answer at all on that. Oliver, we have an unused action which might bring the India people to realise cheap oil is not worthwhile for sacrificing democracy. A worldwide boycott of Indian cricket and its competition and players. Well, that's a harsh move, I think. And then, very nice. Someone said, more of Dom Jolly, please, but spelt my name wrong. So they're probably not talking about me. That was probably aimed at Ed Vasey.